So good afternoon, everyone. This is Audrey Russo, President and CEO of the Pittsburgh Technology Council, and always joined here by Jonathan Kirsting. He's Vice President of all things media and marketing and storytelling for the Tech Council. And today is our 200th episode of Business as Usual. And I can't, not only is that cool for us, hopefully cool for all of you, but I'm thrilled to have today's guest because in many ways we're actually bookending his career. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce him. And if you see me doing a lot of oohs and ahs over him, it's real. It's real. I've been a huge fan of his for the entire time that he's been in his role as chairman of the FCC. And you are going to be just thrilled to see him now. So I'm pretty excited. So first of all, I want to give a shout out to Huntington Bank, thanking them for believing in us and being a big supporter of all things that we experiment with, particularly in communication and marketing and telling stories. They've just been a champion of ours. And if you don't know them, get to know them. Also want to give a shout out to AT&T. We've been partners with them for a really long time, and they have helped us in so many different ways, particularly in areas of public policy and making sure that we have the tools that we need to forge ahead in this new economy of tech and information. They've been great partners. And 40 by 80, that's the longitude and latitude of Pittsburgh. And that is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Pittsburgh Tech Council. It's our nonprofit arm, our 501c3, and we focus on all things that are related to workforce, pipeline development, and entrepreneurship. So we have muted your mics. If you've been on the show before, we have lots of opportunities for you to chat with our guests. Jonathan's going to monitor that. And lastly, this isn't an opportunity to sell your wares. That's not what today is about. This is an opportunity just to sit back, enjoy, listen, understand that we are a global community. We are a national community, and Pittsburgh is a magical place, and we have an opportunity now to bring on Chairman Ajit Pai, who has led the FCC for the last, 4 years, right?
That's right.
It's been that long, I know. Hard to believe, but why this is so exciting is that when Chairman actually kicked off his tour, he kicked it off in Pittsburgh. And we did it with Carnegie Mellon University. We did a live stream all across the nation. And the chairman has been just incredible in terms of his support of Pittsburgh. There was a time he came and we hung out with a whole bunch of entrepreneurs in East Liberty. And we couldn't peel him away. We couldn't peel him away. And I don't think I'm making that up. Right, Chairman?
That's right. No, you're too kind as always.
I'm not always too kind, but to you, I'm kind. So you actually, the pathways and the relationship and the leadership that you've had since, since these past 4 years has just been tremendous. But I want everyone to understand, who is Chairman Pai? Who is Ajit? Because he has an interesting background. He really has an interesting background. And you have been with the FCC for a total of 8 years, right?
That's right. 8 years as a commissioner and chair. 4 years before that as a staffer, right. So 12 in total.
Right. So you've just had such a great understanding of just the whole complexity of what's happening in Washington and beyond on, every side of the table. So we're really thrilled. So it's 8 years, 4 years as chairman. But Ajit, tell everyone a little bit about your roots, because the entrepreneurial community, I think if you haven't heard this before, you really should hear this now.
Oh, you're too kind, Audrey. Thank you, as I said, for hosting me. Thanks to you, to Brian, to Jonathan, the entire Pittsburgh Technology Council for giving me this platform on literally my last full day in this position. I feel so blessed throughout my life, and especially throughout my professional career. My parents were the entrepreneurs of our family. They came to the United States in 1971 from India with literally nothing in their pocket other than $8, a transistor radio, and a belief that the American dream would be within reach. They moved to Buffalo and didn't know anybody, had no safety net, no friends, no family, etc. But they had me in 1973, my sister in 1977, and we ended up moving to rural Kansas, where I then spent the bulk of my childhood. And every time I go back home and I speak to my grade school teachers and my high school friends, etc., I just tell them, only in America, it's such a great country that allows people to come from wherever on the planet they might be from and just create something here in the United States. And I've tried to be, of course, worthy of my parents' sacrifice in the years since. And now, of course, being in this position, having been appointed by 2 presidents to serve in these leadership roles, it's just been the honor of a lifetime, especially to be the first Indian American to be in this position. So to me, at least, I leave with a very full heart, not for the title and the fancy office and all that, but more for just the chance to serve the American people. It's been the ride of a lifetime.
It really has. And so how are you different from when you entered 8 years ago?
Well, I think the most discernible differences are a lot more gray hair and about 20 pounds. But in terms of the intangibles, I think, I've certainly have become much more keen on the importance of setting the strategy and just executing aggressively, which is what we've done over the past 4 years. And also just the management of the agency. You don't really learn in college or in grad school, at least I didn't, in law school, about managing a big organization and around certain key goals, and to be able to leverage the FCC's best asset, which is its amazing staff, and focus them on things like, closing the digital divide, American leadership in 5G, protecting consumers from robocalls, and establishing 988 as a 3-digit number for suicide prevention and mental health, and also just transforming how the agency operates, making it more transparent and nimble and responsive. That is something that I've learned a lot about over the last 4 years, and happy to say I've been drawing a lot of lessons from you, Audrey, over my time. It's everything started with you and the PTC back in 2012, as you know, and I'm a lot wiser now because of it.
Well, let's think about this. What people tend to not understand, and I love this whole piece about entrepreneurship, but you are in many ways, running FCC and being the voice of that is one thing, but then you're also operationally responsible. So what has it been like to work for you?
I mean, I would like to think if you asked any of the FCC staff, with me off camera, of course, they would tell you that we work hard, but we work exceptionally in a collegial way. We've been more productive than any FCC in recent history, twice as productive over the last 30 years. We've actually tallied that up. But we've also been much more bipartisan than ever before. 88% of our votes, for example, have been unanimous, which is unusual in FCC history. It's below 50% over the years before that. But also, just in terms of thinking about where to move, typically the agency has been more backward looking. We try to fit new technologies and ideas into the categories we already know. But one of the things I try to encourage our staff to think about was, if you were starting from scratch, how would you craft a regulatory framework? And the best example here would be our subsidy programs for broadband. Typically, this involved us just cutting a check to rural telephone companies and saying, via con Dios. But we thought, no, any company using any technology should be allowed to compete for that funding so long as they can meet our service thresholds. And that's why you've seen companies like SpaceX, not LEO, low Earth orbit satellite companies participating, electric utilities, fixed wireless companies using unlicensed spectrum. So that's just one of many, many different examples where we've encouraged the staff. You think about where the marketplace is going, and let's try to catch up and encourage that future now instead of just waiting for it to happen.
And so what do you think, where do you see the FCC continuing to play a role in solving, a lot of the problems in the coming years? I mean, you've set the framework, you've had bipartisan leadership roles. So talk about that.
I do think our core initiatives have been bipartisan in nature. For example, closing the digital divide. We've started, of course, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, a $20 billion fund to get broadband access to over 10 million Americans who don't have it. We've started a companion fund for 5G, the 5G fund, which will be a $9 billion program to make sure that those areas that are unlikely to see private investment will have federal support to encourage a business case in those areas. And that's just on the subsidy side. On the regulatory side, there's some very profound reforms that might seem arcane, but for example, encouraging companies to migrate from copper to fiber, one-touch make ready, so that competitive fiber providers, instead of having to ask the incumbent cable company and electric utility for permission to attach the fiber to a utility pole, they can do that work themselves. I mean, very powerful reduction in the cost element. So those types of things I think are going to continue into the future. They were all pretty much bipartisan in nature. And I think the pandemic, if anything, has underscored the importance of making sure that every American gets connected, and soon.
Mm-hmm. I mean, listen, you've faced, the pandemic. That's nothing that anyone had on our clock that we anticipated. And, the obvious issues around the digital divide became quite profound in a very, very short period of time.
Yeah.
particularly for communities of color, rural Americas. You've been an advocate. So, you know, I'm going to quote from a report from the Brookings Institute real quick,
Yeah.
is that while lower income African Americans and Hispanics have similar levels of smartphone ownership as actually whites in the United States, they are more likely to depend on mobile services for online access, which is why 5G networks must be widely available, affordable, and able to support emerging techs that, you know, technologies that address public interest and concerns. So they're talking about the notion that so many low-income families, you know, don't have access to broadband only through their mobile device.
Right.
And that's the case around the world in many places, right? Isn't it similar? Like if you go to Africa and you go to South America, that's the same. That's very, very similar. So with this, what do you want? How can we encourage this rollout, this whole 5G rollout? What's your wisdom on that?
Well, I think one thing is continuing to execute the FCC's 5G Fast Plan, which I rolled out back in 2018. And you can get more information at fcc.gov/5G. But in a nutshell, it involves making more spectrum available for the commercial marketplace, making it easier to deploy wireless infrastructure like small cells, and modernizing our regulations to encourage the deployment of fiber. And as a sign of how aggressive we've been, we just finished the largest auction in American history of the so-called C-band spectrum, which raised $80 billion for the US Treasury. And so that's a sign, I think, that companies are interested, but that's just licensed spectrum. We've also changed the game in terms of unlicensed spectrum, which people use for things like Wi-Fi. Compared to when I came into office, there's now a 5x increase in the amount of unlicensed spectrum that any innovator or entrepreneur can use. You don't have to come to the FCC and ask for permission to use it. You can use it yourself. And that's going to be a game changer for American consumers, especially low-income consumers who can now benefit from that spectrum through fixed wireless services or through being able to connect many more devices at home. It's going to be a game changer. And we're now seeing the ecosystem from wireless routers to devices blossom, because now companies, entrepreneurs have the certainty they have that Wi-Fi spectrum is going to be there. So it's a really exciting time in the spectrum field, and hopefully that too will continue in the time to come. Oh, the other thing I'll mention briefly, by the way, is I've encouraged Congress for about a year now to give the FCC authorities to set up a low-income consumer program, and they just did that a couple of weeks ago with emergency coronavirus legislation. So they've set up an emergency broadband benefit, which we've started the process of administering, but it'll be up to the next FCC to make sure that those dollars go into the hands of consumers, low-income consumers, in the form of cheaper services or cheaper devices.
Well, we have a bunch of questions that are out here that we're gonna
Sure.
back, but before we do, people often speak about 5G in terms of it's 100 times faster, right? But that's not really what the impact is.
I agree. I agree. I mean, I think, of course, that's the easy tagline for those who view 5G solely through how much faster is my phone going to be. But to me, at least, it's going to be transformative in terms of the verticals, how it disrupts in a positive way healthcare, for example, through the delivery of telehealth, how it disrupts things like remote learning through high definition video and the like, how it transforms gaming, which is going to be incredibly important in terms of the bandwidth and the lower latency, and things that people might not think about. Precision agriculture, for example. I visited a number of farms and ranches across the country over the last 4 years. They need symmetric connectivity to be able to upload data from combines, process it in the cloud using AI, and then download it very quickly. That's exactly what a 5G network is tailored to do. So more in terms of the sectors of the economy, I think that's where the real pop is going to be, even if the thing that gets most play on commercials on TV or whatever is, hey, you've got a faster phone. That's nice, but I don't think that's where 5G is really going to pop.
Great. And so can you talk about agriculture a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember one of the last trips I took before the pandemic ended our travel was to a corn farm in Nebraska. And I remember that we were, to South Dakota, Nebraska was the end stop. But so we were looking at this farm, and it was a cornfield. And the farmer was describing, yes, now we want to be able to use precision ag, because every square yard we want to know how much fertilizer was applied last year, what's the soil moisture content, et cetera. What was the yield last year? What do we want it to be this year? All that information is essentially just data, but he can't process it locally on the combine, even though it's a smart combine that's guided by GPS and doesn't really need a human. What he needs is the ability to upload that data into the cloud, have someone process it, and then tell him, okay, for this square yard, this is how much fertilizer has to be applied, or you can manage the combine this way or that way, and much higher yields, which is going to be incredibly important. The other thing is much more environmentally sustainable. Obviously, we don't want to just blanket these fields with fertilizer and pesticides, et cetera, and they can do much more textured analysis of how the field is and where it needs to be. So just one example. Another one is ranchers. I visited a ranch in Colorado, very entrepreneurial woman who set up her own online auction system for cattle. And she sells to some of the biggest groups that ultimately end up selling to restaurants, high-end restaurants. And she's using a 4G LTE platform, which is nice. But she said that because each cow has an RFID tag, she would love to be able to essentially convey a lot more information a lot more quickly, so that people know exactly, what did the cow eat the last year? How was it fed? What was the chain of custody? All that sort of stuff. It might sound kind of arcane, but to me at least, empowering women like her to do what they do best, which is raise these cattle and bring them to market in a healthy way, that's great. And that's something that 5G can enable.
And that's what people want, actually. People want to understand as much information about what they eat and where they get it from and how they're supporting people. And then that's sort of the transition into this new world about finding information about origins and point to point.
Yeah.
So what about gaming? What are you seeing in gaming?
So to me, I think gaming is the tip of the spear in terms of the need for high-speed connectivity. Latency obviously is one of the critical factors there, the responsiveness of the network when you move, press a button or whatever, but also just the bandwidth, the sheer amount of bandwidth. And we're talking about high definition video. So typically in the case of wireless, it's going to be higher bandwidth, mid-band to high band or millimeter wave spectrum. Additionally, it's going to require a lot more fiber deployment. And I think about a visit I did to Las Vegas where CenturyLink had deployed fiber, gigabit fiber to an apartment complex. And they did no marketing at all. And somehow within days, word got out. And now of the 30 units that are available in that complex, 28 of them are gamers and 2 are doctors who do radiology and want to scan things in high definition. And that's just an example of, if you build these high-speed networks, gamers can really benefit. And so we want to make sure that both with respect to wireless and wired networks, we have the strongest possible infrastructure to enable them to play and to succeed.
And then I'm going to go through a couple of others because I know that you know this information. What about like traffic management?
Absolutely. So here, I think we're making tremendous strides. Over the last 4 years, we've made more spectrum available. For one thing, for connected vehicle to everything, or CV to X as it's called. So a car, as it's going along, will sense other cars, pedestrians, traffic signage, and the like. And because all these cars will be interconnected, they now have dedicated spectrum, the 5.9 gigahertz band, to be able to communicate with each other. And all the automakers now have certainty. We also freed up a massive amount of spectrum from 76 to 81 gigahertz, almost 4 gigahertz in total in that band, for vehicular radar. And that's now being used for things like collision avoidance and the like. So that's just on the spectrum side. In terms of infrastructure, we've worked with the Department of Transportation and others to see if there are ways to make sure that these transportation networks are seamless. Obviously, you can't have some smart cars on the road. Everyone needs to be on the same page, so that, and that's going to be a complex task in the years to come. So hopefully our successors at both agencies can figure it out along with the automakers.
Well, what about some of your predictions? I mean, what are some other predictions do you think that maybe we're really at the cusp of that's going to change how we live? And, I mean, you gave us, some great examples there, but I know, and we, ride sharing, there's been so much innovation that has occurred from this 3 to 5G period of time. What else are you seeing? Are you seeing, because you're an entrepreneur and you have an eyeball for that. So you have seen a lot of these trends. What are you seeing?
Well, you're generous. I'm just the one pushing paper. Your members are the ones actually doing the heavy lifting to deliver value as entrepreneurs. But what I would say is that the pandemic has underscored the nature of work, the changing nature of work. So now I think with so many people working remotely, the FCC itself has been remote for the last 10 months. I think people have come to the realization that obviously in-person interaction is great, and we don't want to discount that, but the norm going forward for many people may be working from home. And so to the extent that broadband becomes more ubiquitous and high speed, that changes everything. I mean, obviously the nature of the work itself, but also the commercial real estate sector. I mean, what is the need for sort of big buildings in densely populated urban cores if you have all these people working remotely, even where people live. I mean, I've talked to some coworkers who've been working from South Carolina or Florida, or even one case, even rural Montana. They're still able to get the job done. They're just working where they want to be. And so I think that's going to be a tremendous change for society. The other one is going to be remote learning. I mean, now, especially with so much of the learning going virtual, I think there's going to be an opportunity there to figure out how do we best educate our kids wherever they happen to be, and a lot of exciting development there. And telehealth too, I think that's going to be the most dramatic change, I think, in the next couple of years. Now that the model of healthcare delivery is being inverted, with care being delivered where the patient happens to be, as opposed to where the bricks and mortar healthcare facility happens to be, we're on the cusp of some major changes. And here we actually got authority from Congress a year ago almost to set up a COVID-19 telehealth program. Just to give you an example, one of the grantees from that program was the University of Pittsburgh Children's Hospital, where they are now having child transplant patients connected remotely so they don't have to come in when they're immunocompromised. And that's already delivering huge benefits in terms of health outcomes, and also just a reduction in the anxiety and stress that parents might have, so that they don't have to worry, is my child going to be at risk if we have to go back into the UPMC? That's not something that they have to worry about. So anyway, sorry to blather on, but I think the future is incredibly bright for all these technologies.
No, I agree with you. And I love hearing that what your view is in terms of the working world as well as the healthcare world. I don't think we're going back, right? I don't think we're going back to how it was. We're going to have human interaction, obviously, and we're going to do some amazing things, and we're going to have events, and we're going to do that kind of stuff. But I think that this has been, sort of a switch. This pivot is, and we're not returning to it.
Yeah, I agree. And I hope that coming out of the pandemic, knock on wood, hopefully we will soon, some of the things that we've learned will continue into the future. For example, with respect to telehealth, some of the relaxation of interstate medical licensure will continue. That's not something that we have jurisdiction over, but now I think everybody appreciates that if you're a physician in Maryland, you should be able to deliver healthcare to a patient in Pittsburgh. It shouldn't matter that you're crossing state lines. Your expertise is what matters, not the piece of paper saying where you're certified. And so that's the kind of thing that I hope we can continue into the future.
I think so too. And the same thing with work, as you described before, other kinds of knowledge workers and workers.
Yeah.
So we talk about, as we talk about 5G, right? Have and have not. We can't avoid the complex issues, right, that it faces in the rollout of 5G. Mentioned that before, which is local regulation. So Pittsburgh is currently on the small list of cities that's falling behind other parts of the country in deployment of 5G. There are many sticking points in the current discussion, and I know we only have a few minutes on this, but the issue of permits and fees is currently high on that list. What can the FCC do to help us to make, to make this, much more an ease of use? And, we want to make sure that we are at the epicenter and, future proofing as much as we can our region and our city. So on the other hand, what can business and economic development organizations do to try to help that?
It's a great question. I mean, over the last 4 years, we've been pretty aggressive on this front. So, for example, we issued an order streamlining the process for local permitting, allowing municipalities to recover the reasonable costs, but setting a limit in terms of what those costs can be. Same thing with respect to timing, giving them a reasonable time to make a decision, but they have to make a decision. They can't just sit on things and effectively impose a moratorium. In addition to those types of reforms, which are upheld by the courts overall very strongly, we've also created model codes. So for those municipalities that are interested in delivering high-speed networks for the benefit of their constituents, they can take the model codes that we've created over the last 4 years and tweak them as suits local conditions, but use that as a blueprint for broadband deployment. And we've had very good partnerships with some municipalities like the city of Los Angeles, for example, or smaller towns like the city of Sioux Falls in South Dakota. And as a result, they've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of wireless infrastructure that they've been able to deploy, especially less conspicuous 5G infrastructure. These tend to be smaller cells that, the size of a pizza box, they're relatively inconspicuous and are much more environmentally friendly. So those, at the end of the day, I hope we can convince local leaders we're all on the same page. We want our constituents to get connected. Let's make sure that we have a regulatory framework that protects your legitimate prerogatives, but doesn't stand in the way of next generation services being delivered in Pittsburgh, when down the road in Zelienople, everyone is benefiting from these high-speed networks. We want everyone to get digital opportunity together.
Wait a second. How do you know Zelienople?
I visited there. So I went there to visit a broadband project, and it was in the middle of the winter, I remember, and one of the work crews was telling me how difficult it can be when there's a network outage. You have to get to some of these hubs and figure out where the problem is. It's a challenge, and so it was great. Yeah, went to Permanis on the way back after that. I do remember that as well. So my cardiologist was probably on speed dial after that, but no, the folks in Zelienople were great, and to me, whether it's a big city or a small town, I think we want to make sure that everybody gets connected. And I tried to demonstrate through my travels that I care about this very deeply.
No, you always do. You always make sure that you're in an urban area and in a less urban area. And that's
Absolutely
what about you. So I know we're coming up to the end, and I know there might have been questions, and I so apologize. Is there any question out there, Brian or Jonathan, maybe one that you want to pick before I ask him what's next?
I think there's a good one here going up earlier in our conversation from Jason Hunt. And Ajit, so cool to have you here today, and I'm looking forward to what you do next, that's for sure. And hopefully you'll still hang out with the Tech Council. So Jason wants to know, what is the one thing you think that the FCC should do to expand broadband internet? Are there other tools the federal government could be deploying to achieve this goal?
Great question. So in my first major speech as chairman in March of 2017 in Pittsburgh, I said that I hoped that Congress would allocate substantial funding to the FCC to build up broadband, $50 billion, $60 billion, whatever that number is. I thought it should be substantial. Imagine now, almost 4 years later, had Congress given us that funding, how much even stronger our broadband networks would be. I hope that they will tackle this in a bipartisan way in the future. I think the second thing is making sure that the FCC has more authority to make some substantial changes. For example, we don't have jurisdiction over utility poles that are owned by municipalities or by railroads, just two big examples. And that dramatically increases the cost of a broadband network, because if you're a fiber provider, especially a competitive one, you don't have the wherewithal to pay thousands of dollars to the railroad or to the city for each and every utility pole. And those are the types of reforms I'd like to see. In terms of reforms for us that we could do ourselves, I think we've done a pretty good job pushing a lot of spectrum out there for licensed and unlicensed, but I'd love to see the FCC having uniform authority over spectrum. The federal government, some might not know, holds the bulk of usable spectrum for wireless use, but they don't actually use it that optimally. That spectrum is being managed by the Department of Commerce, not by the FCC. And so, and we're a relative outlier in terms of that bifurcation. I would love to see unified authority at the FCC so we can deliver even more value to consumers, especially lower income consumers in areas like rural Pennsylvania or in urban cores, where wireless providers have to really carefully think about the ROI. And if it's not there, they won't deploy those networks.
So what's next for you? What's next for you? What do you think? I know that you're going to sleep on the 21st, but then you're going to wake up on the 22nd. And what are the big problems that you'd love to focus on or plan to focus on, or the next stage of your career? What do you think?
A great question. I'm not sure. I still, I've been sprinting to the finish, so I haven't had a chance. But on the 21st, when I wake up, I take a swig out of this good old mug here, my trusted pal over the last 4 years. I'll start to think about what the different options are. And as I said, I don't know what it will be, but what I do hope is that it will provide the same intellectual stimulation and interest in technology, and also the ability to deliver value for the American people. And, to me at least, and I know I'm biased, the ICT sector is just incredible. One of the last visit I did before the pandemic was to the Wind River Reservation in rural Athene, Wyoming. And I had a chance to visit with tribal elders and the Wind River Internet Company, which is a tribally owned broadband provider. Because of FCC funding back in 2018 and 2019, they've now deployed gigabit fiber to members of the tribe, including connecting the tribal health clinic, the tribal school. And to look in the faces of those members of the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone tribes and know that we had a part in them finally having access to what I call digital opportunity, it was the best feeling I've ever had. And so whatever the next job is, I hope that it's something that gives me the ability to connect people with the outside world through the use of technology. We'll see what it might be, but stay tuned. I've joked that if the Kansas City Chiefs need a washed up 47-year-old slot receiver in their Super Bowl run, I'm their guy, but barring that kind of extraneous possibility, I'll be focusing on something in tech, I hope.
Yeah, we don't have to talk football, okay? We don't have to talk football.
No. You guys had a great season. It's a tough break there at the end, especially at the hands of Cleveland. My God, it's of all the teams to lose to.
I know, but Kansas City has certainly held their own. So I know that you feel strongly about that. So can you move to Pittsburgh? Do you think you can move to Pittsburgh?
God's honest truth, I love Pittsburgh. My in-laws are from Youngstown, so whenever we fly in there, we fly into Pittsburgh, and I'm just so impressed by the resilience of the city. As you might remember, almost 9 years ago, my first major speech, I marveled at the fact that what had been called the Steel City and had been written off for decades thereafter has completely reinvented itself through the use of technology. And I still remember visiting some of those entrepreneurs at places like Duolingo or the then new Google office that had just opened up. And it's incredible how the whole city's been revitalized, and there's a sense of energy there, in addition to, of course, the history of the Steelers and the beautiful layout of the city, et cetera. So I think you've been a blueprint for the rest of the country on how technology can be used to improve the economy, improve the standard of life, deliver hope for the community. And I'll see what my wife thinks. She's a big Browns fan, so just on principle, she might not want to move to Pittsburgh, but I'd love to set up shop there in some capacity in the future.
We are all fans. We deeply appreciate the work and the leadership that you've had over these 8 years, and then as leader over the last 4 years. You've been a good friend to the community, and we're going to keep in touch with you. You're not going away. So I appreciate everyone for joining us today. This is an honor to bookend the amazing career, but it's only one chapter of your career, right? It's only one chapter of your career. And Chairman Ajit Pai, I assume I can call you Chairman from now on, right?
No, just Ajit. I'm not big on the titles. My kids certainly don't call me Chairman, I can tell you that. And, as for the next chapter in my career, I think my mom's way of putting that is, finally, Ajit, you have no more excuses not to go to medical school. So we'll see.
Oh my gosh. Is there a chance you can go to medical school now?
Oh my God. I still have, emblazoned in my brain is the scar tissue from my chemistry lab freshman year thinking, I can't do this for the rest of my life. So we'll see. Maybe things have mellowed out a little bit, and still have some aptitude for it, but I don't see myself taking the MCAT anytime soon.
Well, we are going to keep tabs on you. We're going to be close. I see someone, Brian, put out there that we're having a civic hackathon coming up. If you want to join us and be a judge, we'd love that. But we can work on the side. I want you to rest this weekend. I want you to rest this weekend, but we're going to keep tabs on you. I want to thank everyone for joining us and for being champions on the issue at hand. We're not going to give up in terms of what it looks like for the future. I want to thank AT&T for their longstanding partnership with us and in terms of public policy, and being amazing colleagues with us as we try to move the region forward, along with Huntington Bank. So I can't thank you, Ajit. We are going to stay connected. Thank you, everyone. And tomorrow, Jonathan, who do we have? The new executive director of LifeX?
We do, and I'll be interviewing him because you will be in a board meeting tomorrow. So will be the new host tomorrow. So everyone beware. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It will. Ajit.
Oh, you're the best, Audrey. Jonathan, Brian, everybody at PTC. Thanks so much again. It's been the ride of a lifetime, and I'm glad that you were along for it.
We will stay connected. Thanks, everyone. Glad you're safe. Stay safe. And Jonathan will be here tomorrow with the new executive director of LifeX.